Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's podcast.
Hello.
I'm Holly.
I'm Danny.
And today we are going back to 1920s Hamilton, Ontario. So just a little bit of background about Canada at the time. Throughout North America, the 1920s were known as the Roaring Twenties. The era became synonymous with Prohibition, a time when the United States banned alcohol and its illicit consumption flourished. The Temperance Act was already in full effect in Canada since 1916. So today we are going to be having a conversation about Bessie Starkman of Hamilton, Ontario, Queen of the Bootleggers, financial genius, mob wife, and a major player in the narcotics rackets of the 1920s.
So Bessie was born in Poland on June 21st, 1890. She immigrated to Canada with her family at around 1900. They settled in the Ward, which is in Toronto. And when she was 18, she married Harry Tobin. And they had two daughters together called Gertrude and Lily. So in 1912, Bessie had met notorious gangster Rocco Perri, who was an Italian immigrant. He lived as a boarder in their family home, and shortly after they began an affair, and that was when Perri was working on the Welland Canal around 1913. Eventually, Bessie left her family, her faith, and her children behind, and started living with Rocco in St. Catharines, and they lived in a common-law relationship.
Yeah, which really surprised me. I didn't even know. I guess common law relationships would have happened back then, but I don't think it would have been common. I mean, in the 19-teens era, it seems like everybody was married.
Yeah, I don't think they were big on divorce at that time either, so, I don't know. Because were they married?
They didn't end up getting married. They stayed common law. So, yeah, well, that's a big step for her. I don't know what happened there. There's not much that's known about Bessie's husband, although doing research, I've read that he went on to a fine life after she left him. And she did keep in touch with her children, but yeah, she just clear up and left him for Rocco.
Yeah. So, due to World War I, the Canadian government, they cut the Welland Canal project funding, and then Rocco became unemployed. So eventually he started working for a bakery as a salesman, and then he was working at the Superior Macaroni Company, where he traveled around and sold macaroni.
Traveling pasta salesman.
That would have been quite a job in those days, eh? It'd still be a job in these days if there was a need for it. But,
yeah.
So they started surviving financially, mostly from his income as a macaroni salesman, and they also opened a grocery store that was on Hess Street in Hamilton. So once the Temperance Act came into effect, and that was September 16th, 1916, it restricted the sale and distribution of alcohol. It was illegal to have it anywhere else but at home, so you couldn't sell it or consume it in public places. So eventually they realized that they could make better money bootlegging and selling it out of their house. So Rocco was an immigrant from Calabria in Italy, and eventually became the head of the Calabrian mob in southern Ontario. And eventually Bessie became his right-hand woman in the business, and most men were not keen on having women in the mob in those days. So she was kind of like the first, at least in Canada.
Yeah, and she was actually the only Jewish woman in history to command an Italian mob, which is that was a big deal.
Yeah. She did pretty well for herself, really, for a woman in those times.
She was very, very strong. I mean, look how she just walked out on her family. She was just going to do what she was going to do.
Yeah.
And in a world that was so dominated by men, organized crime, she came out very, very well. And she ended up being very well respected by a lot of them, including Al Capone. They weren't extremely fond of her, but she had a keen mind. Very good business sense. Made a lot of money.
Yeah, and eventually, thanks to the success that she bought the company or the business, most people started to call her the boss. Even Rocco was considered Al Capone's main man in Canada.
He was, yeah. There was a connection there with Al Capone, which I think is great because just when I think about the old school gangsters, I think about Al Capone. He's very, very fascinating.
He's definitely the main guy down in America at the time.
Yeah.
He was, especially during Prohibition.
Yeah.
So Rocco started out in the mob neighborhoods of Hamilton, Ontario, and he created a booze empire that stretched into the United States. While most other mobsters shipped booze south by boat along the coast, Rocco laundered his liquor as turnips and sent boxcar loads south down to New York and West Chicago. So it was illegal to sell or purchase liquor inside Canada, so what he would do would be to ship it down to New York and then re-import it. That way they weren't necessarily, well, they were breaking the law, but it was like a loophole they found.
Well, it was kind of a financial loophole too because he ended up making more money that way.
Yeah.
It was pretty much double the money.
Making money both ways, exporting and importing.
Yeah. Yeah. Smart.
Yep. And I'm pretty sure that was thanks to Bessie, too. She definitely had the business sense for financial success.
Yeah, and she had a lot of business connections, too.
Yeah. So some of Rocco and Bessie's best customers, they included Al Capone and Joseph Kennedy, which is the father of JFK.
Yeah, that's how the Kennedys made their fortune. And it's believed, which I, thinking back, sure, that's possibly how JFK got into the White House was he got a little help from the mafia. They played around with well, I can't say exactly. I don't want to go there, but I feel like they put a lot of pressure on people to vote for Kennedy and maybe swung the ballots and fake ballots and all that good stuff. So, yeah, apparently that's how JFK got in there, but that's how the Kennedy family made their money.
I feel like well, not just the 20s, but the early 20th century was definitely a time when, like, people had the opportunity to make their own fortune in different ways. Technology was advancing for the time, and different businesses were popping up.
Actually, the 20s were even time for inventions. There's so much happened in the 20s. So, yeah, it was an upswing. Because during the war, the industries were at their peak in Canada and everyone was living pretty good. After the war, employment or unemployment rates went sky high because all the soldiers coming back from the war looking for work. So then the Depression hit. So this was sort of, after World War I. So this was sort of the upswing.
So when Al Capone was asked if he knew Bessie and Rocco, his reply was, "Why? I don't even know which street Canada is on." So he claims he never set foot on Canadian soil. But he supposedly had 3 major hideouts in Canada, which was in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, Ottawa Valley, and possibly another in Montreal.
Oh, he definitely did. It's very mobster of him to just deny everything. Like the old, I ain't saying nothing. Of course he set foot in Canada. He was seen in Canada, but of course he's going to deny it.
Yeah. Well, and to say, he doesn't even know what street Canada is on,
that's
a pretty cheeky thing to say.
Yeah, he's playing.
Yeah.
He was just playing. But yeah, I guess it would have probably, they eventually got him on tax evasion. They didn't really get him on much else. When they did arrest him, he would usually get out. tax evasion is what did him in. So I guess in order to avoid maybe international charges, he just said he never went to Canada.
Yeah.
It wasn't me.
Nope. So Al Capone and various other bootleggers utilized tunnels in Saskatchewan during Prohibition that were originally dug by Chinese railway workers many years before.
So smart. I mean, the tunnels were left over from building the railway across the west, so they saw it was available, and he said, well, good idea.
Yeah, and we actually found some tunnels and caves that they had built in Hamilton, too.
So unfortunately, the tunnels are... There was a building where the tunnels were. They removed the building, therefore exposing these tunnels. So actually the tunnels are a little bit blocked in right now, but we went there and we got some footage and pictures, and we'll show you. Here it is right now.
So Bessie and Rocco were considered the darlings of the press in this time. They were anti-heroes, really, because most people weren't fond of Prohibition or the Temperance Act in those days. A lot of people were still working hard in those days, and that was one way to let loose.
Yeah, I think with... there's a lot of the mafia, the old gangsters, that are considered anti-heroes, and people really love them. A lot of them were not well liked, of course, but for the most part, I think there was a lot of respect there for them. It's, yeah, some things never change.
Yeah.
Really.
And that was also not unlike many others that were involved with organized crime.
Yeah, yeah.
And especially Rocco's job as a traveling pasta salesman, it took him all over Ontario. Gave him a good chance to make some leads with people, spread the word. And again, that was kind of why he was like an anti-hero. He was friend of the people and bringing them what they want.
Bringing the booze to the people.
And eventually, once bootlegging became a much larger and more profitable enterprise, that was about the time that Prohibition was declared in Canada, which was 1918. And the 18th Amendment that prohibited the sale of alcohol in the United States in 1920.
Yeah, so the Temperance Act had already gone through, and in 1918, Prohibition was declared in Canada nationwide. So there was already the Temperance Act in order there, but this kind of solidified Prohibition.
And made things a bit better for them to operate. I'm pretty sure they weren't too worried about the law enforcement. Mostly Rocco had a lot of the cops in his pocket in those days, at least around Hamilton. I imagine being a traveling pasta salesman, he's pretty good with words.
Bessie had a lot of good connections too, including people that were in politics and I think also police. So yeah, they were pretty good. The only ones that really kept on Rocco and Bessie's case were the RCMP. That was a whole other story. But as far as local police, no problem.
Yeah, they didn't have too much trouble.
No.
So Bessie's business connections and Rocco's importing-exporting connections established a very profitable enterprise. It was by this time that they were living in Hamilton, Ontario, and by 1920 they moved into a larger home on Bay Street South in Hamilton. We did try looking into this house, but unfortunately it's being demolished, and it's now a high-rise apartment building, I believe.
Yeah, I think there's two high rises there where it is on Bay Street South. So that house no longer exists. We were trying to get as many photographs of things that had to do with this case, and there's not a lot of it left actually. And I think that house, Bessie and Rocco's house, ended up having a fire. I mean, there was another reason why it was taken down. Otherwise, it was a big, beautiful home.
So in 1918, Rocco began having an affair with a Sarah Olive Routledge. They had 2 daughters together, and he refused to marry her but maintained a home for her and the children in St. Catharines. So in the meantime, Bessie stayed busy by running the finances for their organization and never questioned Rocco about his affair.
Okay.
She's a pretty strong-willed woman, so I'm sure if she wanted to be with a guy, then so be it.
She, just looking back and looking into her and sort of researching the both of them, they were very, very good together. They were good in business. They were a pretty good couple. I feel like he wouldn't have fared too well without her. And actually, a little bit later on, sort of that's the way it goes. But I mean, had he never met her, I don't think he would have done as well. He needed her more than she needed him.
Yeah,
I guess.
I think so. Well, he had the street smarts, but she had the business smarts. So had he been doing that by himself, I mean, I'm sure he probably would have gotten into a lot more trouble.
Well, she was taking all care of the financial stuff. She was dealing with all the money.
Yeah. So in February 1922, Sarah was informed by Rocco's lawyer that he was already married to Bessie, which was not true, as they weren't legally married. But she was so distraught by that news that she took her own life, and she jumped from her lawyer's 7th-story office window on the Bank of Hamilton. And her parents took custody of the children.
Yeah, so sad ending for poor Sarah. I don't know if I guess she was just so hopeful that they were going to be together, and I suppose he hid Bessie, which I don't know how, because he and Bessie were the talk of the town, so I don't know how Sarah didn't know. But yeah, poor girl ended up jumping off a building because he wouldn't settle down with her. Sad.
So eventually Perry diversified into gambling, extortion, and prostitution. One report estimates that in the mid-20s, Perry and Starkman were generating $1 million per year throughout criminal endeavors, and had 100 employees. And Bessie was actually the head of the operations, and she was the negotiator and the deal maker.
Isn't that something? But he trusted her enough to do that. Like, he's pretty much from the old country. So for him to have that much faith in her, that says something. That definitely says something. Yeah, she's unique for the time.
Yeah. Also in that era, Perry was a big spender, so to speak, and they had a nice lavish lifestyle. Bessie was always seen dripping in jewels, pearls, and gold.
Yeah.
It's also reported that Perry paid only $13.30 in income tax based on employment as a macaroni salesman, and his export mail order business in 1926.
Yeah, so hey, that's the whole tax evasion. I mean, he was never caught for tax evasion, but yeah, they're bringing in $1 million a year, and he's paying $13 in income tax. So There you go. So also in 1926, Bessie claimed to be supporting Rocco on her income tax forms. So she ended up paying $96.43 in income tax. Some reports at the time indicated that she had between $500,000 and $1 million in deposit at various banks.
Jeez.
So that's a lot of money for back then.
A lot of money. Even to have like $1,000 was a lot of money in those days.
I think even maybe $100 might have been some kind of big money back then. Yeah. Anyway, I mean, she was rocking it. Following the end of Prohibition in Ontario in 1927, Rocco and Bessie moved into the narcotics racket. So, moving away from alcohol because now it was becoming readily available, and they're moving into the drug game. So, they used their connections in New York, New Jersey, and Philadelphia to sell the drugs. So Rocco was not interested in the drug racket whatsoever. This is a quote from the Whiskey King book, and it's a pretty popular book about Rocco and Bessie. It was written by Trevor Cole, and he says, Bessie was a somewhat vain woman who was somewhat ruthless, but undoubtedly very smart. Rocco had the network of men they needed for the distribution and enforcement, but Bessie understood the business. She advised him, encouraged him, and facilitated a lot of what he did. She had an innate understanding of how to take advantage of certain situations. People have a kind of romantic view that Bessie was responsible for much of what they did in bootlegging. And although she is called the queen of the bootleggers, it is certainly clear that she was responsible for the narcotics traffic. So that was, again, she was queen of the bootleggers, but the narcotics racket was her baby alone. That was actually her favorite. But Bessie knew that it was going to be even more profitable than the liquor racket. So they were about to make some even bigger money. In August 1930, gangsters were dying in droves in Ontario and in the United States. So something was happening there. A lot of the families were going after each other. It could have had something to do with prohibition ending and alcohol being readily available. So that whole part of their industry was gone. So it was getting to be desperate times. And actually the narcotics business, it was very, very rough. This is when the mafia became less business and just more scary.
Yeah.
So, with that being said, on August 13th, 1930, Bessie was ambushed at around 11:15 p.m. as she got out of their car in the garage of the couple's home on Bay Street South in Hamilton. These are some facts of what happened. Rocco actually did talk to the police, and this is according to him and witnesses. So, the garage door behind their house was already open, so Bessie drove in, parked the car next to their other vehicle. As she turned off the engine, Bessie said to Rocco, "Close the garage door, I'll go turn on the light." Bessie had only taken a few steps when shotguns roared, briefly illuminating the garage interior and filling it with smoke. So Rocco got out of the car, ran down the street after the assailants. He didn't see who they were, but he saw figures and went after them. Didn't catch up with them, and then he came back to Bessie to see how she was doing and saw that she had been killed with 2 shotgun blasts. So shotgun blasts right in front of you, that'll do it. That'll do it. Rocco left again, fleeing into the back alley behind their home and coming out onto Duke Street. And that's where he ran into his first witnesses. So witnesses say that he appeared to be deranged with terror in his eyes. Rocco kept crying and yelling, "They've killed her, they've killed her." So he's absolutely distraught. I don't know if this is something that they were expecting. He certainly loved her a lot. He's absolutely beside himself.
Guess he just didn't see it coming. You know, if they were just getting home, they figured everything's going swell so far, so...
I think, but that's sort of that's the game, I guess.
Yeah.
And it started getting rough. So one of the witnesses accompanied Rocco back to his home. They saw again Bessie lying in a pool of blood from multiple shotgun wounds. That neighbor called the police, and the police were there fairly quickly to investigate. Also, gangsters, gamblers, bootleggers who were associated with Bessie and Rocco started showing up as soon as they got the news. So word spread. This was going down. It sounds like word got around quickly because everyone seemed to show up there like immediately.
Yeah.
So there was a brief investigation into this murder. It resulted in no criminal charges being brought. Rocco even offered a $5,000 reward for anyone that had any information, and
that's a lot of money too. Like,
that's a pretty good reward, and nobody would talk. So I guess, yeah, it's the first theory about who killed her may explain why a lot of people wouldn't have talked. So it was first thought that Antonia Papalia played a role in the murder. Her killers apparently fled in automobiles stolen from the garage where Antonia worked. So Antonia was a made man. He was associated with Bessie and Rocco. At the time, he was working as a bootlegger, and he ran speakeasies in Hamilton, I believe one in Toronto. I still feel like it was the narcotics rackets that really made everything go downhill. It really soured a lot of relationships. Antonio later on would found the Papalia crime family in Hamilton in the 1940s. So that is also a very, very big story in Hamilton. A lot of players in that one. If you would like, we can delve into that. Maybe just leave a comment or come over to the Facebook page and let us know if you'd like to learn anything more about the mafia history in Hamilton or in Ontario, because it's quite interesting, actually. We've only just touched the surface here.
Yeah, there's lots more in the depths.
Oh, absolutely. So, also, Bessie's murder may have been drug-related. A few days before the shooting, 2 Americans had allegedly visited the Perry home and demanded payment for a recent narcotics shipment. So Rocco actually he urged Bessie to comply. She did not want to either give these people money, or maybe they were trying to get extra money for her, but she was like, no, I'm not giving you any money. And Rocco said, better cooperate with these guys, because they're, who knows, it doesn't say who they are. I didn't find out who they were, but they must have been scary enough for Rocco to say, hey, go along with them. Like, come on. And she said no.
Especially considering him and his crew were like the muscle of their organization, so to be actually threatened by somebody else?
Yeah. So, and also it might not have been that these fellas were really that scary. It wasn't that Rocco maybe was afraid of them, but it was sort of maybe business associates that were connected to somebody that was connected to somebody. So it's about the whole industry as a whole. So maybe he just wanted to sort of keep it good, but she fought it. She refused for reasons that were never made clear and ordered the visitors out of her home. So that brings the theory that maybe this was drug related. Maybe she was killed by these gangsters from America. So interesting. Like it's not known. It's not known. These are unsolved cases. So
sounds pretty feasible though.
Yeah. The drug rackets and the as far as organized crime goes, it was the downfall of a lot of the families. Big time. On August 17th, about 20,000 people lined the streets in Hamilton for the funeral procession of hundreds of vehicles. So everybody was there. And I was reading about some of the citizens of Hamilton that were there, and he was saying that it's just lineups of shiny black cars that go on for miles and miles. It's still considered the biggest funeral in Hamilton's history.
Jeez, and I guess implying the black shiny cars would be mafia and mob.
Yeah, businessmen. It was described as a hectic funeral, very, very sad. Rocco was overcome with grief for Bessie, and he fainted at her gravesite. There's a photograph there, and I'll put it right here for you to see. I felt bad for him. Felt sorry for him. He was, this really did a number on him. Really did. But yeah, he was absolutely distraught. Very, very sad. Rocco bought her a very lavish headstone, and her name was listed on the headstone as Bessie Starkman Perry. They weren't married, but I guess he wanted to make sure that she had his name because he loved her so much. But the Perry name was later removed by unknown persons. I tried to find some information about that. I'm assuming maybe it was her family or descendants, so, nothing more to say about it. The Perry name is removed from it. Part of Bessie's estate went to Rocco, and the rest to her children and her former husband. So here's where we get into something that's a little bit twisted. And this is another theory about sort of why she was killed. Some people think that Rocco had ordered the hit himself.
Which, I know, considering how distraught he was, it would be hard to believe that. But
I guess they, whoever came up with this theory thought, he could just be acting as though he's so distraught.
yeah,
I guess. So Bessie's treatment of the American drug runners that I mentioned earlier was not an isolated incident, and her domineering ways could have been seen as bad for business. She had already embarrassed Rocco on several occasions by refusing financial aid to families of jailed gang members. So she was very tight with the money.
not a good move.
No, and that's the way it goes, sort of, when members of the family or in your crew sort of go to prison. You distance yourself from them, but there's always usually some kind of financial help or money
support
stuck aside for them, or take care of the wife. She refused to do that, which embarrassed him a great deal. And he had promised these people help, so that made it even worse. She also had affairs with powerful men, so she was stepping out herself. And I didn't want to say it at the time we were talking about it, but yeah, she was doing it herself. One of whom was allegedly the Hamilton police chief.
So no wonder they got away with so much.
Yeah, so she was doing her thing too.
Yeah.
Yep. And his friends often taunted his apparent inability to control her. So her affairs, the way she conducted herself, Rocco caught some flack for that. And, being in the mob and everything is a lot about reputation, and it was a man's world.
He had to be a man's man and the tough guy, pretty much, really.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the majority of them were family men, but their actual family, was kept separate from their business. So I think still, although a lot of, their associates respected her, I still think in the background they were like, you got to do something about her. So that's where the theory or the rumor started that maybe Rocco ordered this hit on her, which that's awful to think about. I really like to think that he really was distraught when she was taken. And, but this, this is not unheard of.
Oh, especially considering too, it was in the business or the mob business in those days, it was frowned upon to have women involved. So considering she was kind of like the brains of the operation and so demanding, even though she got a lot of respect, I think it might have rubbed some guys the wrong way.
Oh, definitely
Maybe.
did. Although I think, like we said, I think the majority of them, on a business level, they were happy to do business with her because she was good at it.
Yeah.
Things started to go downhill slowly for Rocco after losing his lover and business partner. So this was mostly about Bessie, but we can delve a little bit into Rocco, what happened after. So he actually got together with another woman. They were business partners, not as successful as he and Bessie. He was making enemies everywhere over the years. I don't know what happened to him, if he just sort of started to lose it, or he just took a turn. They were better together, and he really needed her.
Yeah.
On April 23rd, 1944, mobster Rocco Perry put on his brown fedora and went for a walk to try to shake off a headache, and he was never seen or heard from again. It is believed that he is in a barrel of cement at the bottom of Hamilton Bay. And I read this a number of times. The rumor is that Antonio and his son Johnny Papalia, who mentioned earlier, may have had something to do with Bessie's murder. So Antonio and Johnny, along with members of a mob family from Buffalo, New York, may have played a role in Rocco's disappearance, because apparently Rocco insulted members of his crew. So we don't know where Rocco is. He could be under the water. He disappeared, so chances are he was taken down as well. Both cases remain unsolved, and I think they're going to stay that way. I think we can only speculate. Nobody's saying anything really.
Yeah.
Um,
He was on his way to, I think it was his cousin's house that's a little closer to the water, just around the corner from the tunnels we showed you earlier. We're not quite sure if he had just been there and left and was on his way home, or if he was on his way there from home. But somewhere in between he disappeared. And like I said, he's never been found. Nobody really knows where he is or what happened to him.
yeah. So, sad story. I mean, they were doing well there.
Yeah.
They were doing well. Wow, what a woman for the time, though.
Yeah.
What a woman for the time. And the types of people that she had to deal with. That was no joke. Well, women were just actually given the right to vote. I can't give you the exact year, but it was around these times. And that was just out of necessity, basically. So, women still didn't have many rights. For the most part, we're homemakers. I mean, the 1920s in Canada and America, because things were picking up and people were getting rich and, doing very well, having homes. So there was a big scene of the perfect homemaker. Yeah. And you have all these things in your home, and your home is beautiful. Like, there was a big push for women to stay in the home at the time. Your home could be luxurious. So for her to come out in a time like that, especially into the mob, like, wow.
Yeah. Well,
wow.
If you even think, too, if there was up to 20,000 people at her funeral, like when she's not there, but so many people came to pay their respects. I think she would have been quite an interesting character to meet, I think.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Jeez. And it's so cool because when we went to Hamilton to get the photographs and the videos of the tunnels, and I was sort of looking all over and I'm like, Hamilton's, it has its issues, but it still has a lot of the great architecture and the buildings from the past. And I was thinking, what was it like in the 20s? Yeah. What a different time.
I would have liked to have met her. She can boss me around, whatever.
I don't know. I just wanted, this business sense and this... I would just like to sort of pick her brain. Like, how did you ever deal with the likes of Al Capone and Joseph Kennedy?
Yeah.
Wow. That takes strength. The business world at the time was also the whole world was dominated by men, but especially in business and organized crime. I'd just like to know how she did it. She's a fascinating lady, and that's why we wanted to cover her. Also, it's a really neat part of Ontario history, in particular Southern Ontario. So if you would like to see any more or learn any more about the mob era in Ontario, just let us know by leaving a comment. Or again, come over to the Facebook page. We'd be happy to do it because we got some things to say.
Yeah, and also, while you're here, like and subscribe down at the bottom here.
Yes, please subscribe. We're trying to build our channel, and we're having a lot of fun. It's growing very, very well. We appreciate you guys so much. Maybe just pass it on, We're aiming to get to 1,000 subscribers maybe not by the end of the year. Maybe a little bit more than the end of the year, so... If you wouldn't mind liking and sharing with your friends.
Yeah, let us know what you think of our snappy outfits, too. Doesn't Holly look great?
Oh, please. So thanks for joining us, everybody. It's a bit of a short video, but I think we got the point across. There's nothing more to say. These are unsolved. But yeah, cheers, Bessie. Rocco, yeah. I don't know where you are, but buddy, way to go, man. You found a loophole.
Yeah, you found the workarounds and you worked around them.
Okay, cheers, guys. We'll see you next time.
Farewell.